Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth class in an 8-part series on the Mars-Pluto phases. Today, we're going to look at Mars-Pluto in the Gibbous phase. This is our May 2020 class. Before we get started, here is our housekeeping slide that will give you a hyperlink to whatever we offer at EAN. If any of you are interested, every time Venus goes retrograde, I offer to do compatibility readings for no extra charge. Doesn't have to just be intimacy. It can be a parent, a child, a friend, coworker, etc. And of course, I think Leroy's already told you our YouTube channel is back. Yahoo, yahoo. Finally, only took 6 months. So now we're moving forward with changing things on the website. Through that purgatory, Leroy and I decided that we need to revamp our website. We haven't done it in 7 years, so we're getting ready to do it one more time. Stay tuned. We'll point things out month by month as we fine tune things in our faster moving world. And so here is the basic slide that shows you the cycle of phases and aspects. This was first developed by Dane Rudier, adopted and expanded by Jeffrey Wolf Green. And then I also started using it, and I moved the 0 degrees conjunction to be the same as 0 degrees Aries, so the 8 phases somewhat match up to the 12 archetypes. And I also moved this slide. Here's just a basic listing for you to see the 8 phases and the actual degrees that they cover. And this is something that with time you will memorize. Where is 220 degrees? Oh, it's full phase. So basics, determining aspects to the planets. In evolutionary astrology, we always start with the slower moving planet, and we move the faster moving planet counterclockwise, reversing through signs and houses until we get to where that faster moving planet is, and we see their phasal relationship and any specific aspect they may make. An exception to the rule for Kim Marie is that I compare the sun to the outer planets. And I do that because of a geocentric or Earth-centered perspective and 20-some years of doing astrological forecasting and watching that sun move faster than those outer planets. If you want more details on determining these aspects and some of the basics, I refer you, now that we have the YouTube channel back up, I refer you to some classes that I did on the basics of the phases and aspects, and a math class on that back in 2014. You can Google math review, and that will then take you to that specific class in segment 1 that goes into more details of doing the math, especially from 180 to 360, which can sometimes be a little confusing to do in your head until you've worked with it enough times. In determining aspects to the nodal axis, we always start with the planet, regardless of which planet it is, and we move the nodes in a clockwise fashion. Oops, I said that wrong on the last slide. Counterclockwise is moving through the signs and houses. Clockwise with the nodes is reversing through the signs and the houses. And quickly, if we start with Uranus and move clockwise, the outer circle here, we go all the way around the circle until we get to the north node, making a balsamic conjunction to Uranus. Inner circle, if we start with Uranus, we get almost 180 degrees around till we get to the south node, which is making a waxing gibbous opposition to Uranus. So generically, there are basically 4 types of evolution with Pluto. 2 are non-cataclysmic, 2 are cataclysmic, and they can blend together in various degrees and circumstances. 2 of the non-cataclysmic, producing or creating a situation in which we form a relationship to something we perceive that we need. This is the basics with intimate relationships or even friendships. We also can produce or create a situation in which we become aware of a new capacity or capability that has been latent or dormant. It does require some perseverance and will or desire to actualize it. The example that I give is when I discovered astrology. It was very easy for me to do the astronomy and the astrology because I have done both in previous lifetimes. So the latency or dormancy was actually from a past life. It can be from the current life, it can be from past lives. The cataclysmic types of evolution with Pluto the Soul, producing or creating an emotional shock in which some behavioral pattern, life situation is removed from our life. A divorce, a death, job loss. Many of us may be going through the job loss situations, the relationship upsets with Venus retrograde and losing jobs. All of us can be going through some degree of emotional shock right now in 2020 due to the transits of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and their 5 conjunctions this year. We can also produce or create situations in our lives in which we become aware of an internal or external source of stagnation or limitation that's blocking growth. It can create a major crisis, it can create a minor crisis. It causes us to make a change and a switch in some particular way in our life. There are 3 reactions to the whole evolutionary impulse with Pluto the Soul. We can totally resist. That has a tendency to be rare. We can totally go for it 100%. That tends to be rare. By far, the most common reaction is to be willing to change in some ways and yet resist changing in other ways, either due to the fear of the unknown, we don't know what will come from it, or various security patterns that we have set up and that have become quite entrenched in our world. Now, from the perspective of Jeffrey Wolf Green evolutionary astrology, we look at those 8 basal relationships, those 8 45-degree aspects that mark a new phase. We look at those as the primary lifetimes for a soul, and it generally takes 8 to 9 lifetimes from primary perspective to work through the lessons of the main karmic dynamic and evolutionary intent of Pluto, however it is represented by a specific Pluto house. And so here again, those primary lifetimes are always one of the 45-degree aspects. We use a little bit smaller orbs here for the primary lifetimes. If Mars is 190 degrees from Pluto and it's 10 degrees past the opposition, it would be more of a secondary lifetime than a primary. And in between any of these 8 Mars-Pluto primary aspects, 45 degrees, there can be all kinds of secondary lifetimes, and that's going to be represented by all of those secondary aspects. I'll show you the degrees on the next screen. What we want to take from this, though, is the soul, our soul. It has free choice and it has free will to take as long as necessary or to go as fast as the soul desires in its process of evolution and expanding in consciousness. So here's the primary lifetime examples, the Mars-Pluto angle, as you can see, 0, 45, 90, etc., etc. I'm going to mute. I think I'm going to sneeze. All right, thank you. Back. And again, with this, then we would include, say, for example, the 45-degree aspect. We could include 43, 44 degrees. We could include 46, 47, 48. That would fall within that narrow window of primary aspect, primary lifetime. The secondary lifetimes you also see on your screen. The Mars-Pluto angle can be 30, 60, 122. In other words, we can have specific aspects that are not 45-degree angles. We can also have Mars, Pluto, and no specific aspect at all. They have a phasal relationship within a specific phase, but they may or may not have an aspect. That's going to be that secondary lifetime example. Oops, got to do this again for you. Okay, there we go. And of course, I put this in every slide. Do souls go through lifetimes in consecutive Mars-Pluto phasal relationship order via a specific natal Pluto house? Answer, who knows? How many of us crossed over to the other side and came right back and said, this is the answer? We don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Personally, I have a tendency to think we do not. I think we can skip around from Pluto in the first house to Pluto in the sixth house to Pluto in the 10th house. But over many lifetimes, I think that the Mars-Pluto phase will go through all 8 primary phases with Pluto in a specific house. And we will do it through all 12 houses. How many of you can wrap your mind around the fact that maybe we may even do Pluto around the 12 houses with those Mars phases more than once? Whew, good thing we have an unconsciousness, huh? And so here is an example for you visually of looking at Pluto as the 0 point. And then Mars at 0, Mars at 45, Mars at 90, showing you those 8 specific aspects that Mars and Pluto will make to each other in those primary lifetimes. Also, remember that all of us, all souls just through life, are always in a state of continuous change and evolution. And we know this through that archetype of Mars, Aries, first house. We always are having desires that we identify and wish to act upon. And so that 0 to 360 with Mars and Pluto represents a complete cycle of evolution specific to that natal Pluto house. From birth, growth, bloom, to decay and death and rebirth again. And finally, this is true with Mars, Pluto, but it's true between any 2 planets or any planet and point in space. Every single planet and point in space is in a phasal relationship to every other planet and point in space. An aspect may or may not exist between them, and the aspect is understood from the phase first, with the aspect filling in the details. I think that last point should be one of the first things taught in astrology, because beginners When they start looking at a planet, a sign, and a house and blending archetypes together, it can get quite confusing. And one of the things that Jeffrey Green would always bring home in his teachings is that you start with the 12 archetypes, because Mars is interchangeable with Aries, which is interchangeable with the first house. When you understand that's a single archetype, then you can learn to blend the 12 archetypes. And then when you add on those planets, you start with the phasal relationship and then fill in the aspect. That alone takes a lot of confusion out of astrological interpretation. And it helps a lot of souls be more successful in learning and understanding and then practicing astrology. I am fond of saying it's the closest thing we have to an owner's manual. So here we are one more time with the generic slide of the 8 phases. And what we're going to look at today is the Gibbous phase. Its keyword is self-analysis. It is a yin phase, which means energy is moving back to the center. It starts at 135 degrees with the sesquisquadrate, which is the square and a half, and it goes through the biquintile, the quincunx, the triseptile to 180 degrees. So Gibbous goes from 135 to 180. That's what we're going to look at. Both of our examples are towards the latter part of this phase, and we'll bring those charts in by example as we get to those degrees. And so here is the Gibbous phase. In general, it is an evolutionary transition whereby the soul is going to humble itself in some way to begin the process of socially integrating. What is it going to socially integrate with Mars, Pluto? The original evolutionary intention of the desire nature related to that new phase, back to the new phase. And that new phase is going to be where Pluto is by natal house and sign. And so in this phase, that inflated sense of egocentric self-development, these are my desires and everybody's got to love my desires. It has to align with societal need. There is a preparation in this phase of integrating all our desires and our manifestation of them into society as an equal with others. Coming off of that first quarter, which contains the first 15 degrees of Leo in the natural zodiac. 135 degrees is 15 Leo in the natural zodiac. We are starting that shift through the second half of the natural zodiac, the last half of Leo, so to speak. And we're learning that my desires are not more important than yours. You have desires as well. Now, every phase has an opposite phase. And opposite the gibbous phase is balsamic, the last of the 8 phases from 315 to 360 degrees. And so as we go through the process of humiliation and or the process of confusion, as the pyramid inverts and we're thrown off our high horse, all of that humiliation and confusion around being able to manifest those desires. Remember, Gibbous is coming after first quarter phase. I did it. I got it out there. I'm doing it. This is, my desire to be an entrepreneur and own my own company. It's happening. But our company selling coffee is no more important than anybody else's company selling coffee. And so what this then teaches us via this opposite phase is surrendering to a higher power and understanding, surrendering to universal source, if you want to name it that way specifically. And what happens when we can recognize a higher power or source that helps us calm down the confusion, and it helps us with understanding, how do I make changes in my desires? And so any of these manifestations that we are making of our desires, they're going to evolve into new realities and new forms that have deeper and deeper meaning for us. And part of that deeper meaning is because we're not doing it just because our ego wants to. We're doing it because we are wanting to evolve into relating to society or the other, and contributing to society or the other or the whole. And so when we look at the aspect of the sesquisquadrate, which is going to be past the 135-degree mark, it is a continuation of the first quarter phase aspect, sesquisquadrate, 132, 33, 34 degrees, except the energy has now shifted from yang to yin, from energy moving out to energy moving in. And so if it's past that 135-degree mark with Mars and Pluto, it's going to intensify inner reflection with Mars, wherever it is by sign house, that helps us clarify what our desires are and how they are changing and how we are evolving them relative to, again, that natal Pluto mark. At this aspect, it is possible that there can be negative experience. Think about the pyramid inverting. There can be negative experiences if we refuse to go inward and adjust this evolutionary process of our soul and how the specific forms of our desires are manifesting. And it will throw us back to the past and experience confusion. Been there, done that. Doesn't work anymore. It'll throw us backwards until we learn how to establish a new personal reality and purpose of whatever our desired nature is. And to do that out there in the world. So we're the first half of the circle. We're still in process of manifesting. We manifest all the way through 0 to 360. But in that first half up to 180, there's still that energy of putting it out there. But now we just can't do it from first quarter will. We have to do it while we start to take larger and larger and larger perspectives into consideration. And we will remain confused until we start making changes and adjustments, however they are necessary. As we move along, eventually we get to the harmonics of 5, and we come across the second quintile, the biquintile, at 144 degrees. Quintiles are always about creativity. And so the biquintile is realigning our individual nature with whatever that original evolutionary purpose of desires was, natal Pluto, sign house. But we're making these adjustments, and now we have figured out how to adjust and how to be creative again in manifesting those desires. And there can always be a link back to that first quintile at 72 degrees in the crescent phase. So here we are, gibbous phase yin, crescent phase yin. The quintiles waxing both exist in those, and we can do inner reflection on a soul level. We may not be seeing back to past lives, but we can intuit it and evolve that manifestation of our desires. So one more time, at the biquintile, there is a little bit of an extra edge in analyzing, being creative on how to link that Pluto evolutionary purpose and desire nature to the needs of other people, to the needs of our environment. We are, giving our desires a new purpose to serve larger and larger whole. And we're starting to really recognize how to be of service, how to be of service, balsamic phase opposition to our deeper soul nature, inwardly, yin phase, how to be of service to others, another person, a group, the society that you are existing in, or even the planet as a whole. And our desires are going to be given more and more meaning and creativity as Mars Pluto moves through the biquintile aspect. And so at this point, we're going to bring in our first volunteer. While Leroy's checking, volunteer, you're welcome to speak up. This is a female who was born March 18th, 1979, 5 a.m. in the morning. I'm not going to pronounce this. Haifa, Haifa, Israel. 7 Pisces, 45-degree rising. This person is in 8th house Pluto, 18.5 Libra retrograde. If you start with Pluto as the 0 point and you move counterclockwise through the signs in the houses, the Mars Pluto angle is 145 degrees and 55 minutes. It's 146 degrees. That biquintile was 144 degrees. It's just 2 degrees past it. We probably know the 150 is the inconjunct. Not quite there yet. It's kind of moving in between those two. Do I have volunteer on the line by any chance?
Yes.
Oh, hi there.
Hi. Hi.
Yeah, thank you, sweetie, for volunteering your chart. Let me quickly go through a few environmental conditionings. You're welcome to add on to things while we discuss everything. And I'm going to get feedback from you after I do environmental conditionings, and I'm just going to ground us in some of the basics one more time of that Mars-Pluto angle, okay? And so this volunteer is not quite sure where she is with evolutionary states. She described the whole individuated state, tipped her toes into spiritualism. She was raised pretty much middle class consensus parents. They were very light Judaism. Mom was a teacher for at special needs kids. Dad's was an engineer in the health industry. She had 2 younger siblings. As with all Israelis, she did her stint in the army. It was one of the time periods that was quite stressful for her. It caused her to have weight gain. She says she has worked through weight issues, eating disorders most of her life. Love of art and dance from a very young age, has went in and out of it. She does have a degree in occupational therapy. She spent time working with autistic kids herself. She's married, long-term married. She has 3 sons. When she was 33, they all moved, or the first 2 sons, I think, some of them. But her and
Yes.
husband moved to the U.S. And currently, the whole family has a cannabis farm. She feels like she spent a lot of her life searching for what she wants to do in life, not necessarily having, that fulfilling achievement of it. In terms of friendship, she has lots of long-term female friendships back in Israel. It's been harder to make friends here in the US. Maybe as we ponder, we might talk about what the differences are. She goes back and forth about moving back to home versus staying in the United States. And volunteer, you didn't mention whether or not husband talked about moving back to Israel or not. So we might touch upon that as we work through everything as well. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the Pluto and Libra generation other than the codependencies, the expectations, the projections, sometimes the neediness, all the key words. You can refer to earlier classes in regards to that. Add on to that, she's a Scorpio soul, Pluto in the 8th house. So that's going to intensify some of the codependency aspects in regards to people, life, desires. An 8th house Pluto is where we have the most intense back and forth between separating desires and returning desires. Separating desires being anyone and anything, returning desire to no source. The fact that her Pluto is retrograde tells us she's throwing off things. She's working to throw off relationship codependencies, expectations. The Pluto retrograde is pointing her towards the generational lesson of Aries and independence and who am I. It's also pointing her towards the second house Pluto polarity point of self-reliance, working towards it on every level. That was in a nutshell. Lots more to it. As we now look at the Mars Pluto relationship, I'm going to say that this person is coming off of the biquintile. She still senses it 2 degrees past, but she's moving towards that 150-degree aspect between Mars and Pluto, which we'll look at as soon as we're done with this example. And so she's caught in a shift, caught in a change. Obviously, we are a secondary lifetime. She's had at least one previous lifetime with Mars in Gibbous phase to Pluto. If we start looking at the Mars signature here, it's in the first house and Pisces. Endings, new beginnings. Do I have boundaries? Who am I? I'm going to charge forth. And yet, we also see here that the South Node is balsamic conjunction to Mars. And not only that, if we start with Pluto and we go clockwise, reversing through signs and houses to the South Node, all right, following me there? That South Node is 211 degrees from Pluto. It is the full phase in conjunct, and it's 1 degree past it. So the nodal axis becomes quite active in this Mars-Pluto relationship. It brings in more energy to the whole karmic complex, as we call it. And so what we will start to look at here in general terms for this soul with that South Node balsamic Mars all by itself is there's an egoic shedding of who the soul is not, as she is pondering, who am I? And the first thing that you might start to look at with both South Node and Mars in Pisces is the confusion over who am I? First house. Mars in its own house. It will lend, well, no, let me kind of adjust that statement. It will lend itself, but there will be a back and forth between that I'm confused, source knows more, everybody else knows more. And yet that Mars still wanting to move forward creatively with its desires and finding itself and expressing itself. So there's a back and forth between endings and new beginnings with that Piscean first house energy. And would I would venture to guess, and by all means volunteer, this will be my last statement, and I want your feedback. I would venture to guess that relative to past lives, maybe you were the controlling one in a relationship, but you also had the partner be a controlling one in the relationship. And over lifetimes, it's went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. We're not quite to relationship based upon equality, 180 degrees, okay? The Pluto polarity point, Mars existing there. We're really trying to express and evolve our relationship, Scorpio soul. And we're doing that through confusion. Remember, as you've just seen, this Gibbous phase understanding here, there will be confusion in this phase whenever we're trying to cling to the past with our desires. And specific to you, it's going to be clinging to old relationship patterning that no longer serves your soul. And it's going to turn you inward, that Pisces part, that first house part, to have you look for deeper meaning in relationships and not just intimacy, Pluto Libra, all your relationships. And you're having to clarify on a deep inner level your relationship with yourself, which is then going to clarify and change and evolve your desired nature, natal Pluto, how you relate to others. Okay, I will be quiet. Feedback. Does this make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Everything makes sense. The word manifestation came before about this phase, and I feel
Mhm,
it's something that I am dealing with, and I'm for sure struggling with for all my life. The polarity between the you want to the desires to act and to do things, and then some kind of confusion how to make it happen.
mhm,
For sure, the relationship thing about all, like, it's need to be very specific relationship to answer my deep needs. Otherwise, I will prefer to not have this relationship if it's not like just feel good in any
mhm,
relationship, no matter what. Then I think through my life, through my family, I needed to work on how to be in relationship with people that not exactly go to these places that I want to go, but they still my family, and I love them, and how I can do that. I think I learned through life how to see and how to accept something from everybody, and not, not to be so specific with
mhm,
my needs.
mhm.
What else? For sure, the confusion about the first house, Mars, Pisces. Who am I? For sure, it's something I remember. It was a question since I was a child. What's going on here? What I supposed to be here and do here? Yeah. Um,
You know, it's hard not to look at your chart and not point out transiting Neptune in Pisces.
mhm.
It's coming in and it's not only intensifying the confusion, but it's also helping you really, really shed any desires that are not fulfilling for you, any ego that is, not supporting who you authentically are anymore. And I would say in general, as Neptune moves beyond the south node, as it slowly but surely moves over and beyond your sun, this is going to be the timing of the real clarification for you. I had thought in general with this Mars Pluto aspect specific to your chart, there is somewhat of a need to be gentle with yourself. And there's also a need to give yourself time to process emotionally, because the Mars South Node in the first can get frustrated with all of this Piscean sensitivity. And you see why we have this wide trine and water that gets brought in. So you're quite sensitive and you don't know what's yours or what's not yours. And so you actually need that inner time period here to process and get clear on what's yours or not yours.
Yeah, I had a hard time to accept it through my life, and I think this Neptune now let me surrender to this need, to this
Mm-hmm.
aspect of myself. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Let's bring in the fact that, Mars has a pretty strong aspect here to Saturn over here, just inside the ascendant in Virgo. Saturn is retrograde. The North Node is moving into that balsamic conjunction to Saturn. And Mars is a full phase opposition to Saturn. I think that this may be part of confusion that comes in. Souls who have Saturn in the seventh house can create a structure of reality that the other seventh house does it better than they do. The other, and I'm saying that broadly, whether it is family, partner, friends, society, the other in general uh, has more information, has more experience, has more of that Saturnian way of being able to manifest everything. And if you add on that Saturn in Virgo, all right, it can further intensify that energy of I am less than the other. This adds into the picture of Mars in a gibbous phase to Pluto. And so together they're all adding on that eighth house Pluto. Others have more power than me. Others are better at doing things and manifesting their desires than me. And their structure of consciousness is feeding into this. And so tell me if you agree, but as you have moved through your life, have you, you've really had to shift, adjust Mars Pluto Gibbous phase from taking everybody else on authority to learning how to take yourself as your best authority for you. Would you agree?
Yes, totally.
Mm.
It's in a process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My
Mm-hmm.
my first tendency is like anybody, like everybody knows, like who am I? Why should I know? Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I would also say that your inner work, the inner work of your soul in this lifetime, is just as important as anything you do outside.
Yes,
All
and I'm
right.
doing, war. I'm doing it always, because I always had hard time with myself. So
Mhm.
when I was in the army, it was a point in time that I had to do something, and started, like I said, I started a healing process that, the discovery of myself, going inward, workshops, therapies, everything, astrology, of course.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, whatever you perceive, um, if you look at this Mars Pluto phase and the Mars and South Node, and you can even bring in your Sun in Pisces, by nature of the Mars Pluto phase and its polarity balsamic, that Mars Pluto phase is pulling you forward spiritually. And it may show you that I would venture to guess with this signature right here. The planet conjunct the South Node is relive, fruition, or a mixture of both. And this may signify past lives when you actually did live closer to nature. And this can even be true of Saturn in Virgo when you look at the Virgo in a natural perspective versus patriarchal distortions. Virgo belongs to the mutable quadrant, which is in evolutionary astrology the quadrant of natural spiritual laws and principles. So being giving, loving, and serving to others is what can be buried underneath patriarchal conditionings. And so while you look at Mars or the South Node balsamic Mars, don't see it as always having to go back and do it again and back and do it again. And, yes, you're changing, you're adjusting, but relative to an eighth house Pluto, how these are pulling you forward is they are shifting you into recognizing that the ultimate relationship in the universe is your relationship with source energy, that dual desire nature of an eighth house Pluto. And this isn't quite in the EA writings, but it's just something, I don't know, I adopted as a mantra myself over time. I don't even remember when, but I will say this to clients, and maybe I've said it to you, but I'm going to repeat it for class. The relationship we have with ourself is identical to the relationship we have with God, Goddess, or Source. The relationship we have with God, Goddess, or Source is identical to the relationship we have with ourself. And so in this eighth house, Pluto, Scorpio soul, Pluto Libra generation, desire to really evolve relationships, to move past lifetimes of patriarchal distortions in relationships. It's really with Mars here, this phasal work is one more time moving you into the most important relationship of your life, the one you have with yourself, first house, and ultimately with Source, Pisces. Does this make sense, volunteer?
Yes, yes, yes. And I feel, and like you said, it's about, this phase is also about service, right? So it's
Mhm.
doing all of this, find my own power and my connection to God to be able to serve.
Yes.
That it also was always something I knew I need to do somehow, but all like, you know, looking how
Yes.
exactly. Yeah.
And let me point out, with the nodal axis in South Node Pisces, North Node Virgo, with the Mars Saturn opposition there. It's not doing it from the sadomasochistic perspective of self-sacrifice. It is doing it from the healthy boundaries, fullness of inner self, knowing when to say yes, when to say no perspective.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that will then allow this Neptune that is square the nodes that can add to the confusion of who am I really and how do I take charge of my life midheaven. This will help Neptune, shift into being more aligned with spiritual laws and principles in your world. I would also say that as this inner work is accepted, understood, processed, moved through, adjusted, as I said before, your most important work is inner work. And it's almost a reverse psychology in regard that as you settle into, well, this is who I really am. And learning to love yourself, learning to like yourself, you're going to see that what you do in the world then transforms and manifests. You can build off of that biquintile. You can have the creativity magically appear, so to speak, because we've been doing that inner work of a deep relationship with ourselves to transform outer relationships, to learn how to be of service to others in a very creative way.
Yes.
Now, comments or questions, volunteer?
No.
Okay, that's all right. Let me check in with Leroy. Is there anyone who is live on the class who wants to make a comment or has a question about anything we have been looking at? Interrupt me, Leroy, if there anything comes up. Thank you, volunteer, for letting us explore your chart with you. And I hope this has been helpful for you.
Yeah, and there's nothing from the board. A couple of questions
Okay.
on the Q&A board that I think we've answered while
All
you
right.
were discussing the chart, so I think we can move on.
Okay, volunteer Leroy's really good at muting, so we heard your thank you back energetically. All right, shall we move on then? And next we come to the waxing in conjunct, as I call it. And at this point, this is going to represent the Mars-Pluto aspect, where the soul will either experience confusion or clarity in relating the sense of self to their new evolutionary purpose, form of whatever their desired nature is, and manifesting that out into society. And so there is an intensifying of inner self analysis. How do I adjust myself to be accepted into society? How do I adjust my desires, Mars, Pluto, so that they will be accepted into society. And what happens as we make that self-analysis, or if we're forced into the humility that can come if we're trying to will it to happen, rather than going, what must I change to relate to others? We'll either be open to again making the changes, or we'll be forced into making the changes. If we're forced into the humility and making changes, that's going to lend to more confusion. Why can't I do this? Why can't they see me and what I want to express? If we are perhaps more aligned to our inner work, like for instance, the example we just looked at, and open to making adjustments in our world, then this aspect can actually bring the clarity of how to change in order to manifest our desires into the world. If I just one more moment reach back to our last chart, this person being so willing to do inner changes and her inner work, as that transiting Neptune triggering moves past her sun in the next few years, she can find a real transformation of her relationships. Then she can have that clarity of how to relate to others and satisfaction in relationships, which represents such a core desire for 8th house Pluto. So at this inconjunct, there can be an awareness that there's something special. There's something to manifest. There's something about my desires that I really want to be able to express, even through yin phase. But it will only be noticed. It will only be accepted if it is learning how to link this desire through service to society. And so it becomes, well, how do I do this? Many times, again, we won't know exactly what to adjust, especially from an egoic sense, or Mars, the instinctive conscious desire nature. So we can go through the trial and error. We can go through the confusion and clarity of the gibbous phase, balsamic phase polarity. It is with Mars. Try this, try that. What do I shift and change until I actually work through and figure out something that does work? Now, if we have a soul nature, if we have certain circumstances revealed by signs and houses that do not lend themselves to this inner adjustment, that perhaps lend themselves to the Aryan will and ego wanting to come through, or Leo, or, Capricorn, what we then will move into is the aspect that we call the triseptile. And as you see on your screen, each of these aspects come with a harmonics, which is dividing the circle or 360 by a certain number. And that's where these come up with. Whereas the quintiles are creativity, the septiles are that special destiny or a sense of fatedness. So if we're not willing to make, again, the inner adjustments at the 150 mark, we get to Mars Pluto at 154. And this is where we will have what can appear to be those circumstances and situations that force the humility, that force the adjustments. So the purpose of the aspect is to clarify ourself and our evolutionary purpose with our desires in relationship to what others need, to what society needs as a whole. And one more time, if we're more willing to be inner reflective, those fated events can be of a more harmonious nature. If we are not inclined to all the inner self analysis or working with it, then those fated events or special destiny manifestations can be more of the humiliating side of the equation. Oh, let's use the example of the chart before in 8th house Pluto and the desire, to evolve intimate relationships. They can run into a partner who forces them to make changes with how the relationship is understood and worked through. There can, again, be people, circumstances, situations that will force whatever necessary self analysis we need to walk through. So, this is almost like the final purging, even though we still do it for the next 30 degrees. But this aspect will set the stage. This is 150 degrees is 0 degrees Virgo in the natural zodiac. So this aspect is setting the stage to deflate any delusions of grandeur in which, this is what I desire. I'm just going to throw it out there at you and you're going to love it. Nope. This is where we intensify the adjustments we must make with our desired nature specific to Mars Pluto here. That will then allow our soul to evolve those desires and integrate them into our social environment, singly, group, family, community, societally, and as a whole. All right, so now we're going to move into our next volunteer. I'm going to stop a moment and take a drink. So as Leroy works to help our second volunteer be live, I'm going to just say that this person was born December 21st, 1950, 2:06 p.m. in Baltimore, Maryland. Rising is 16 Taurus, 22 degrees. The Mars-Pluto angle here is 165 degrees, 22 minutes. There's no specific aspect. It's just Mars, Gibbous phase, Pluto. Volunteer, I hear you. Hello.
Hi, Kim. I'm here.
Thank you. Glad you made it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
You bet. I'm going to do exactly as we did with the last volunteer. Point out a few things and then start interacting with you and getting feedback, okay?
Great. Thanks.
So our volunteer feels like she's, that transitionary, third individuated to first spirituated, raised middle class outside of the greater DC area. Her father had a consensus job in the federal government. Mom was a stay-at-home housewife, sun in Pisces. She has one older sister who was born same day as mom. Older sister kind of linked up with mom. Our volunteer kind of linked up with dad, and that created some of his own animosities in this familial environment. older sister was always, there was just pretty much a jealous relationship because our volunteer, was quite smart, did well in school. When she was very young, this older sister pushed her down a flight of stairs. I'm glad you lived. Um, she was mostly happy throughout her childhood, but as she moved through sixth grade, she had a group of friends create some secrecy behind her back and basically betrayed her, and it was quite devastating. She's had spiritual experiences all her life, real young ones out in nature, and then various ones through adulthood. She was blessed to live in nature, although she spent most of her life now and career in New York City. When she was in seventh grade, it was her first time to have heart palpitations, what was called nervous breakdown. And throughout her life, she's had periodically nervous system issues. South Node Virgo here, everyone. And she went to college several times, never finished. The first time, through a bunch of pressure with exams and roommates and everything, she ended up going home, went to her best friend's house, and that father ended up raping her. The family did not know about it. I can only imagine how devastating it was. So she's had a long career in New York City in lots of various businesses. And through a spiritual teacher, she met her best friend, who is a male, and they have been roommates platonically for 20 years. Our volunteers never married. Mom and dad are both deceased. She had a kind of cruel incident with mother, I think, when father died, and so kind of estranged from mother towards the end of her life. If we look at the chart, we see that we have a fourth house Pluto, so a Cancer soul. The Pluto in Leo generation, we have another Pluto retrograde. So all of the lessons around emotional self-reliance here, the creativity of the Pluto in Leo generation. The retrograde Pluto is pointing us over here into the 10th house of taking charge of her own life and learning to be able to step outside of the immediacy of this environment and see the larger pictures. 10th house. Again, we see Mars now, starting with Pluto as a 0 point, moving counterclockwise through signs and houses. Pluto's at 165 degrees from Mars. Or Mars is 165 degrees from Pluto. Mars is over here at 5 degrees Aquarius, and we'll bring it right into the picture. It is in the midst of a grand trine in air signs, mixture of houses with Moon and Saturn in regards to this. So if we're following through what we've been speaking about with Mars, Pluto in this gibbous phase, and we are looking at 165 degrees, we're 15 degrees past the waxing inconjunct. We have that Mars there in Aquarius. To me, it would only seem natural that this soul would be reaching towards greater and greater objectivity around herself, her early environment, around her interactions with the world. And just one more thing that I want to point out here is, excuse me, right there. We have the Mars in a trine with the moon, traditionally mom. She had a stay-at-home mom. And both of them in a trine with Saturn, traditionally the father, and father was the authority figure in the house. And as we point out in EA, just because we necessarily have planets in a grand trine, don't assume that means a smooth, easy, situation or experience. As we can see, she has been through her share of trauma, and she wrote out more details in regards to mom and dad that we just didn't have room on the slide for. So the point is, what we can see from the grand trine for this individual is the potential over time to really become more and more of that Mars objectivity, being able to understand why some of these early childhood fourth house Pluto incidences happened. So again, one more time, when you see a grand trine in a chart, do not assume that it's a happy family or a happy life or happy circumstances, or you were born with a silver spoon. No, a lot of times that potential is there, but it can also be what I call that couch potato aspect of I'm stuck in my story or I'm stuck in my wound. So what we've seen with this soul is some efforts to understand it mentally, grand trine in air, on broader and broader levels. Volunteer, would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, 100%. I think you nailed it when you said this through progressively through my life, greater and greater objectivity, almost with each decade. And then particularly because even in my 20s, I was going to adult children of alcoholics for a while because it was kind of in the air on my mother's side. The dynamics were similar. So I was trying to understand it through that means. And then when it hit, my mother died in 2010. So by 2012, it was like a tsunami of working on the layers. I started with shamanism, and then I did a lot of work with Tibetan sound bowls to, get through some of the emotional trauma, to draw it out and sort of release it. And then, let's see, there was some womb work and, of course, astrology. Throughout my 20s and 30s, I tried to figure things out for astrology. So I think as I got older, it moved from unpacking the layers to figuring it all out to more towards forgiveness. Like in the past 3 or 4 years, I think I'm focused more on releasing at that level. Once I kind of understood more, had some, like you said, had some objectivity about it, some kind of an overview. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interestingly, you have the opposite nodal axis by sign of our last volunteer. You've got the south node in Virgo. And of course, fourth house Pluto, fifth house childhood. You can see where the family environment re-imprinted
Mm.
the emotional and nervous system issues of it's not safe, I can't trust things. This also sometimes can be quite true of the mini generation of Uranus born in Cancer. Very
Mm.
few Uranus in Cancers had safe, loving, familial early environments. Most of them, had trauma, and it didn't have to necessarily be overt trauma. It just could have been whatever circumstances were going on in the family. It was experienced for the Uranus in Cancer soul as trauma. And of course, Uranus is an aspect of the Gibbous, not the Gibbous, the full phase in conjunct to Mars. Start with Uranus, go, 207 degrees to Mars. And so again, the full phase in conjunct, which meant people could come at you. And I think in this early environment, I think this one can describe the trauma of the rape.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because here, the best friend's father, 10th house, a father figure. You know, you just all, you know, coming home from college devastated, going to see your best friend and encountering that father and having the traumatic experience that happened there. And so early on, the Mars may not have been all the best at getting to the objectivity of gibbous phase, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you, perhaps South Node Virgo, I don't know if you did, correct me if I'm wrong, where did you kind of take on, oh, this was my fault, this happened to me with
Yeah.
this father figure?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And if I
Yeah.
just interject real quick about that
Sure.
Uranus Mars coming at you, it was the same thing with the you know, this hate club that I found out in the like, for me it was out of left field, like the rug being pulled out, and the same way with the situation with the rape, kind of when, you know, so yeah, thanks for that point about Mars, this early difficulty of being objective. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And understand, you know, the Pluto and Leo generation with an Aquarius polarity, we all have shock and trauma in our life, especially due to patriarchal distortions. All right. The Pluto and Leo generation will have certain events and circumstances come through that knock them out of subjective awareness, trying to lead them over to the Aquarian detachment to objectify.
Mm.
Well, that doesn't necessarily come through when we're young and we're like, why does, you know, mommy ignore me?
Mm-hmm.
Why does mommy give all her attention to my sister? You know, you're this signature here, a Pluto in Leo, fourth house, and then intensified by the fact that it's retrograde. This signature all by itself is going to signify emotional shocks.
Yeah.
And the emotional shocks are to throw you inward upon yourself to the depth of your soul emotionally, because the evolutionary intent is going to be to evolve into emotional self-reliance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what I will then point out a little more, just for everyone in general, is we look at that 10th house as having to take charge of life. And I'm always pointing out, we look at it as taking charge out there. Well, yes, but first of all, we take charge in here. So the deeper psychology of a 10th house Pluto polarity point is the inward taking charge of our life. And then it follows through with the outward manifestations. So in the longer range, what this Mars-Pluto phase is bringing about for you is that broader perspective of what I want to do that makes me feel in charge of my life inwardly, regardless of how it is manifesting outwardly.
That
And
is so true. Sorry.
no, you're fine. You're fine. And along those lines, volunteer, you are learning to shift how you are in relationships with others so that you're learning to hold that healthy boundary of equality with them.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just bring in the fact that, you know, with the nodal axis here for a moment, all right? We have Chiron square the nodes, and we have the sun pulled into a square to the nodes as well, all right? But the Chiron square the nodes. It's not only Sag, it's also that 8th house. Here's the betrayals of trust with intimate partners. Here's the betrayals of trust with friendships, with the 5th and the 11th. Okay. There's a karmic patterning here, and we may not know all of it in this class, but there's a woundedness at both friendships and intimacy that don't more or less follow along the path of natural law.
Yeah.
And so you've had these betrayals. The betrayals have happened to wake you up. Now, did you betray others in your life? Did you betray friends in past lives? I'm not psychic enough to tell you.
I'm very careful in this life not to betray people, in the sense of not to talk behind people's backs. So maybe, who knows, maybe I did it, in a past life. But I'm very worried about, like, I'm very, what's the word? Not, very, not sterility isn't the word. I'm very, Virgo-ly conscious about being as pure as I could be about being clear about other people and not misrepresenting them. And I think it's because I've experienced gaslighting and things projected on me. And, particularly in my family, it was very codependent, and it was so enmeshed that, you're right, I had to get far away. I had to go to Boston, New York, go far away from where I was born to kind of recreate my reality. So, yeah, as far as the betrayals, I'm not really sure. I don't think I have betrayed other people.
And, I kind of come from the perspective, by the time we're moving into, spirituated states of consciousness, we've been on both sides of the fence. And so, how do we then just proceed forward as best as we all can? And of course, it's going to be learning how to hold a healthy boundary with ourselves and with others.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what you said about, for a long time in my life studying astrology, I mean, I was very ambitious when I was very young, because I did go to a top college, but then, I dropped out. So, of course, part of that was my father's, father influence and, being a great student and all this stuff. But I was ambitious, and I did have creative dreams, but they kept getting burnt out and kind of pushed to the bottom by, these weird betrayals and, the incident with my mother after my father's death. So I kept getting kind of pushed down under. So I finally came to the conclusion that that the mastery that you associate with Mars in the 10th house totally had to be within myself, because it's like I've butted my head against the wall so many times where my faith wasn't borne out. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's what you're talking about with the Chiron, with the skip stuff with the nodes. I got to a point where really I just focused on meditation and internal work, because I couldn't see my way clear through it, I guess is what I'm trying to say in the world.
You were just describing the Mars-Pluto phase for yourself.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, if I may point out for you and everybody, isn't it interesting how important it is to take this Mars-Pluto phasal relationship into consideration rather than just wanting to interpret your Mars aspect all on its own? Traditional astrology might look at that Mars, and it might look at that trine in the air signs and went, oh my gosh, I bet you were just so successful in work and career and your relationships with everybody. And, you know, in some ways it might cause you to go, what planets are they looking at? Same planets, maybe just more from traditional astrological, you know, perspective. Again, I'm trying to bring things into the chart, but I'm really just trying to stay grounded in that Mars Pluto. Volunteer. Any comments or questions from you about your chart? And you can ask questions about anything in your chart if you feel so inclined.
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess I just wanted to say about the I'm trying to get rid of something on my screen so I can focus on. Okay. About it was really interesting to me what you said about the trine, and what you said about the Pluto and Leo generation, because you know there weren't overt, you know, issues like some people have these really hairy stories to tell about their childhood, but I think it was the trauma was in the air, you know, because my mother's mother lost her mother in childbirth, and my mother didn't have a father, so sometimes you don't see it, but it's kind of in the air. And I tried. I wanted so much to be a dancer and to creatively express myself, but you know, my father was against that. So, but the trine, I think, is, you know, my mother wasn't cruel. I mean, I was able to be a kind person, and my father was very resourceful and smart from his depression experience. So I feel like it gave me, like you said, the potential, you know, to make what I could of that, even if there were all those Uranus and Cancer issues. But maybe the one thing I might ask you about is the going from Pluto, going from Leo to the objectivity of Aquarius. Now, I don't know what your feeling is about Sun. I know evolutionary astrologers, you know, disagree on whether it can be a skip step or not. But for me, my experience was kind of being left out of the equation in my family in a lot of ways. So there was almost more of a need to be heard, to be seen, to be acknowledged, and yet the Pluto polarity point of Mars is to be, you know, other oriented and service oriented, you know, and I am idealistic, but that's been like a tension, kind of how to establish myself and yet still, you know, be service oriented, if that makes sense.
Sure. I'm hearing multiple questions, but
Yeah.
you know, if we look at the fact that your sun is 29.5 degrees Sagittarius, you're having a mutation in regards to your personality and your creativity going on. You're leaving behind the lessons of Sagittarius and, you know, honesty, truthfulness, authenticity, and you're moving into that Capricorn energy, which supports the Pluto polarity point of the 10th house, the Capricorn energy that is going on and coming through. If you look at that, yes, it's square the nodes. If you look at that relative to being a 4th house Pluto and having a south node Virgo in the 5th house, there's a back and forth energy within your own soul between hiding and being seen.
Oh yeah.
And the Mars Pluto phase is really asking you to see yourself. And yes, and then once you see yourself, that helps with moving through all of the deep analyzation of the South Node Virgo, which can be the resolution node for both Sun and Chiron. And it helps you really reach over into that North Node, you know, because again, you've had a lot of spiritual experiences in your life, but you didn't really necessarily have anybody to talk to, especially when you were young, that could understand, you know, and so the skip steps with Chiron and Sun, you couldn't really necessarily integrate those that spiritual knowledge when you were young. And so with that sun in that late last degree of Sag, it can also signify that this is something that's come for you as you've moved through this lifetime, as you've gained in experience, you've gained in wisdom. You've unlocked the grand trine in air. You've been able to move over towards seeing yourself and really feeling like this is me, this is my world, and I get to create it. And I'm going to, that's 10th house polarity point, and I'm going to do it co-creatively with Source, North Node Pisces, in the highest and best ways for all concerned. 11th house,
Yeah.
Mars Aquarius, Mars Pluto Gibbous phase. Make sense?
Yeah, I mean, even just to illustrate what you just said, in terms of the Pluto Leo, my biggest, I mean, I wanted to dance, but the other big thing was writing, which is sort of, you can see in the grand air trine. But in my mid 30s and 40s, I was trying to work on a memoir, but I think it was still too personal, too Leo, too, you know, this is who I am. And then as I got older, the aspect of the wisdom of what I had understood from everything I'd been through began to work its way into my writing. So that it was more implicit, you know, not just spelling it out, you know, it was more, the writing became pithier, you know, more like cones instead of, you know, flowery memoirs. So I think that's it. It's trying to gain mastery over myself through that grand trine, which is starting to evolve the Leo gift more towards, you know, Aquarius, more towards, it would be of use to other people. So how do you, one last question, like, how do you see the South Virgo South resolution node? I mean, because I've seen so many problems with the self-doubt of the Gibbous phase and the, you know, just the self perfectionism when I was a child. So how do you see that as the resolution node? Can you just say anything else about that?
In the most simplest way, you have to go from a cup half empty to a cup half full.
Okay.
You have to turn the negative self-talk into positive self-talk.
Okay.
And then that helps you get to a deeper and deeper self-love, 5th house, warts, farts, and all, Virgo.
Yeah, well, I have been doing a lot of, you know, self meditations and, you know, crying and just inner mother work and all that stuff to love myself. So maybe I just see that Virgo South node as too critically when it doesn't have to be. I mean, I guess the lesson is to purify, not to criticize. So maybe I'm just looking at Virgo wrong. You know, maybe that's.
Think of the Gibbous phase. Healthy Virgo, loving and nurturing. And that has to start with yourself.
Yeah.
Then it moves out to others.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
thank you so much.
You're most
thank
welcome.
You so much. It was wonderful.
You are most welcome. I thank both of you for volunteering. And if there's questions or comments, you can speak up, but I've got 2 more aspects to get through before class is over. So give me another 10 minutes here, okay? Yes.
You want to take a question or two from the
Sure,
board
sure,
before you move
sure.
on?
I guess I got one aspect.
Well, we had a very alert student notice that this was a Placidus chart. So I guess just for clarification, they asked about it. I guess I needed for you to tell everybody why we prefer actually the Porphyry house system in EA, but why all house systems will work.
Sure, good question. When I get a volunteer in segment 1 classes, they have the list of environmental conditioning questions that I ask. And one of the questions is I ask if they have a preferred house system that they use. If you have somebody who's been studying their chart in Placidus houses for 20 years, we can work with the Placidus house. Evolutionary astrology works with any house system. It works with whole houses where whatever degree the ascendant is, the example in this chart, A 16-degree Taurus ascended and whole houses would turn into 0 degrees Taurus, with 0 degrees Gemini on the second, 0 degrees Cancer on the third. It works with 0 degree Aries sign on the first house cusp. I have even done evolutionary astrology interpretations from our principles for Vedic charts. I have had people who study Vedic astrology. Kim Marie, I want you to look at my chart as a Vedic chart, and I want you to just read it from evolutionary astrology's perspective. Okay, the principles are the principles in EA. So any house system works with evolutionary astrology. The history from Jeffrey Wolf Green's method is when Jeffrey was doing his research back in the day, looking at 15, 20,000 charts, etc. What he found from his perspective, he thought that Potpourri house systems did a better psychological description versus Koch or Placidus. And if you're not aware of this, and you can go do when you're logged into your associate's account on our website, you can do a keyword for house system, because I've done a class on it. The Koch and Potpourri and Koch, Potpourri, and Placidus all have the same horizontal axes. The ascendant descendant is always the same in all three house systems. In Koch, Potpourri, and Placidus house systems, the vertical ascendant, the fourth house cusp at, wait a minute. Fourth house cusp and 10th house cusps are identical. Where these house systems differ is within each quadrant. In Koch and Placidus houses, if you would do it by hand, there are various tables that you use with latitude and longitude and to come across the map. They're complicated table systems to do to arrive at your inner house cusps. With Potpourri, we take however many degrees are within the quadrant and we just evenly divide it by 3. If there's 85 degrees, we divide it by 3. So each house has the same amount of degrees. If it's 95 degrees in a quadrant, we divide it by 3. So there's the astronomy or math for you. And to repeat one more time, in the Jeffrey Wolf Green method of evolutionary astrology, in his research, he felt that Potpourri houses were a better psychological description of not only Pluto and the nodal axis, but of all of the planetary archetypes. All right, good question. Thank you for noticing.
And our next question comes from Lindsay, who I think is mic'd. Okay, so I'm going to get her on the board.
Okay.
Lindsay, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Well, it's interesting you guys were talking about that we're looking at Placidus, because I put in volunteers' birth information using Porphyry. And
Yes.
when we did that, Leo and Aquarius were actually intercepted.
Aha. There you go.
So yeah, her 4th and 10th become intercepted in Porphyry system. So my question was pertaining to that. But
did the nodes change houses?
The nodes do not change houses. No, they do not.
Okay, so you had a further question, actually, or a slightly different question, is in the Potpourri house systems, this same chart has Leo intercepted in the 4th, and it has Aquarius intercepted in the 10th.
Correct.
From the perspective of evolutionary astrology, we do not assume intercepted signs cannot find their way to be expressed, which is the traditional astrology perspective. With evolutionary astrology, you've got to observe and correlate I'm thinking I did a class on this, but I can't remember. So you can do a word search on interception or intercept and see if it shows up. I can't remember right now. Sometimes I think I should have my class list in front of me so I can refer you easier. Although I do put the classes, the list of the webinars in emails, and I'll try and do that next month, so that you've got an easy access to that now that our YouTube channel is back up. Okay, I'm making a note here for the webinar class list. Okay. With evolutionary astrology, it's more observe and correlate. It may be that those intercepted signs were so well developed in a previous life, there is no need to emphasize. So what you do is in the intercepted sign, you look to see if there's planets there. In this case, we see Pluto the Soul. That right off the bat can tell us that maybe there was emphasis of this in the past. Doesn't necessarily mean egoic development. It might mean all the wounding we talked about was even more emphasized if Pluto was intercepted in Leo in the fourth. The ruler of the intercepted sign, in this case Leo, we look to see where that is, and we look to see, in this case it's the sun. We look to see how active it is in the chart. We've already spoke about it being square the nodes as well as conjunct to Chiron. You can bring in the conjunction with Leo. There might be other aspects as well, but even if that ruler of the intercepted sign is square the nodes from the evolutionary astrology perspective, there's an emphasis as well. Aquarius. We look to see if there's planets in the sign Aquarius. Mars is there. We've already talked about the grand trine of Mars, highly active. The ruler of that intercepted sign Aquarius is down here, Leo. It has that waxing in conjunct to Mars. It has the trine to Jupiter. I'm just looking at the circle. I'm not doing math in my head real fast. And so I would have a tendency to think that the Aquarius sign is intercepted as well. So this may start to tell us that the Leo Aquarius interception has been active in prior lives. It will then have an ability to express itself in this life. Again, the contrast would be as if there were no planets in Leo or Aquarius. The contrast would be if the rulers, the Sun and Uranus, didn't have any aspects, weren't part of the karmic axis. All right, I think that clarified that question, answered it in multiple ways. I'm going to move on unless I get interrupted. I got one more aspect. We have to get to the gibbous side of the 180-degree opposition. This is when two planets are 172, 175, 178 degrees from each other, moving towards the opposition. Here, with Mars Pluto, we're preparing the evolutionary intense manifestation of our desired nature into societal reality as an equal. And I will remind you, as Mars is moving towards 180 degrees with Pluto, Mars is moving towards the Pluto polarity point, the evolutionary intent of the soul's desires natal Pluto. And the whole thing about the whole 170 to 190, the opposition is throwing off something from the past and moving into the manifestation of those desires as an equal. And what we will find here with the 180 degrees, and this is between any two planets, but we're working specifically with Mars Pluto here. The ego experiences the full force of other people's will, other people's desires and reality. And so as Mars is moving towards that opposition with Pluto, I really, really want to manifest the desires of my natal Pluto. and evolved them to that polarity point, but we start to become aware that everyone else is doing it as well. Their Mars, will, ego to manifest their desires is just as strong as ours. So we will come up against others still wanting us to make some type of adjustment, Gibbous phase of how we are manifesting our desires. And you can add in the beliefs, values, needs as well. We're, one more time, running into others who want us to still make some type of adjustment. And the closer we get to that full phase, we're feeling the shifting of yin to yang energy, but it's not there yet. So we experience this opposition from others, and it can cause fear, or it can cause us to retreat. I don't have the will, Mars, to manifest these desires. Or it can cause anger. Why are they opposing me? Why won't they let me create this? And so we can go back and forth. And so it will create cycles of where, again, we withdraw. We withdraw from others or from society. We withdraw from trying to manifest our desires. Pluto via Mars, opposition. It also creates the cycles where, again, then we attempt to go for it. I cannot sit on these desires anymore. I have got to express them. In the case of the previous chart's example with a fourth house Leo, they've got to express their emotions out into the world. And so they'll go back and forth between shutting down emotionally and being overly emotional. Back and forth until they're learning 10th house polarity, still using the previous chart. 10th house polarity, they learn as a mature individual when to emotionally express and when to love themselves emotionally. Fourth house, former 10th house. And so, one more time, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until they learn how to manifest the desire nature as an equal in society. And they also then allow others to express their desires in society as equals. All right, so the final two slides you've seen before. Are there any questions relative to the Gibbous phase? Here's the host series for you. The June class on Mars Pluto full phase is going to be third Tuesday. I'm pretty sure I have the two volunteers already. Looks like I had a dropout. So Miss Lindsay, who asked a question, if you're waiting, it looks like you might be one of those volunteers. And then, of course, here's my classes that I have recently done, if any of you are interested in them. And my most recent class with EA Zoom meetings, I spoke, I ended up with only one public figure because he was so much in the news at that point and probably will continue to be in the news in more ways than ones. We looked at Bill Gates' chart if you're interested in that. All right, final call for comments or questions. I am so thankful and I am so grateful, we both are, to have our YouTube channel back. I would just like to say to any and all of you out there who helped us energize our release from YouTube purgatory, thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It's wonderful to have it back. And one more time, stay tuned as we now move forward modernizing our website, evolutionaryastrology.net. Finally, any comments or questions with being able to access any of the materials, you can always reach out on Facebook. I answer the Facebook information, or you can just do a contact us on the website and Leroy will help you, especially if it's anything technical. All right, thank you everyone. Happy spring. Stay safe through these changing times.